Welcome to Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Hector Montalvo. This show is dedicated to asking tough questions for you, the viewers. We bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Joining us here today at our MCTV studios, we have Mr. Bob Norton. Mr. Norton, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Norton, we've been talking on this show in regards to conflict of interest within government. And we recently learned that you were behind a petition to remove Senator Cream from office. Can you explain to us what drove you to bring that petition?
Well, I wouldn't call it a petition, I'd call it a campaign. We're getting the word out on Senator Cream's behavior and actions, which involve a lot of conflict of interest. Some in government that want to be more politically correct have called it an appearance of conflict of interest, but it really isn't an appearance. It is an absolute conflict of interest. When someone is working on laws, they have a fiduciary responsibility and a responsibility to the people. And if they work under those laws as a divorce lawyer, as she does, they obviously have their own interests in mind, as well as potentially the interests of their industry. So I've been on many boards of directors. I've been a CEO in Massachusetts since 1989, running and starting small companies. And if I did what she was doing in a public company, I would go to jail, because essentially you're voting on something where you have a direct financial interest. And she does. She runs and owns a law firm. She has family members in the law firm. She's been given awards by the Massachusetts Bar Association because her actions are protecting the legal industry. They're not in the best interests of the Massachusetts citizens. And more importantly, and most what we're focused on, is the best interest of children. Everyone in the industry uses that phrase, but in fact, it's a scientific fact that they're doing what's worse for children in over 90% of cases. We now know, and have for about 10 to 15 years, known that sole custody is a form of child abuse. It drives up the problem rate by a factor of more than 100 when a child is in a home with sole custody. You have increases between 660% and 2,400% of 20 different social pathologies that include drug usage, teen pregnancy, school dropouts, crime, gang violence, suicide rates. All of these things go up enormous percentages, and when you add them up, you basically have over, not 100% increase, a factor of 100 increase, which is about a 10,000% increase of problems with children in sole custody homes. Now, I've been working with this since late 2004, 2005, so about 5 years now, and being an expert in management and systems, it took me about 3 years to figure out what's going on here. And what you have to understand is that behind the scenes, interestingly, the title of your show, there's a lot of financial interests going on. Okay, the Massachusetts government gets monies for collecting child support based on the amount they collect. So the higher the child support is, the more money the judiciary system itself gets. So that actually creates a conflict of interest for every judge in every child support case. And they've instituted policies. What we have is a disassembling of the checks and balances in our government today in enormous amounts of conflict of interest. The legislators have actually written themselves a law saying a conflict of interest isn't a conflict of interest, so they can get around the ethical issues by pointing to this law, which is totally fabricated. So Senator Cream, for the last year, has been the co-chair of the Judicial Legislative Committee. And for 5 years now, this committee has stopped a shared parenting bill from moving forward. They put it in committee, which is Beacon Hill Ease for killing the bill each year. Now, in 2004, we had a non-binding referendum on this bill, and on average, about 85% of voters who went to the poll voted for an equal rights shared parenting bill. In other words, the default custody would be shared custody, because we know that's best for children, and most people know this by common sense. But the people in the industry want custody battles. According to the Wall Street Journal, the average custody battle today costs $78,000 just in legal fees, okay? That doesn't include the human damage, the conflict. It doesn't include the expert fees. This is just the legal fees for having a custody battle. So this is a multi-billion-dollar industry in Massachusetts alone that is inflicting damage on families and children for profit. And this bill would simply eliminate the need to have a custody battle, unless, of course, a parent is unfit. Obviously, there are cases if a parent is a drug addict or an alcoholic and there's a serious danger to the children, there's an interest of the state having some authority in that case. But in the general case, they don't have any authority. The parens patriae doctrine, which is what allows a state to have any authority in a family over a child, was created when parents abandoned children.
Right.
And little by little over the years, each decade that passes, government power grows, and these judges are doing more. Now, if you do the math on what a divorce judge does, they spend about 24 minutes per case. So you will have lawyers saying that judges should have discretion and be able to make these decisions. The fact of the matter is there's so much volume, they can't possibly understand any situation well and make a ruling. And what they're doing in Massachusetts is completely unlawful according to the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay? The U.S. Supreme Court has said that to limit, not take away, just limit or take away a parent's rights, you have to have clear and convincing evidence that a parent is unfit, which is a very high bar to get over. There's not a Massachusetts probate court judge that honors that case law, which they're required to, because the Constitution trumps any statute in Massachusetts. There's something called the law of supremacy, which says that no state may make a law that takes away a constitutional right. And we have bodies of law, I mean hundreds of cases, that have affirmed that the right to be a parent to your children is what's called a fundamental constitutional right. So there has to be strict scrutiny, which is getting another legal phrase, and clear and convincing evidence to take away these rights. So what Senator Cream is supporting is essentially a child abuse machine for profit. And all of the 42 judges in Massachusetts that ignore that U.S. Supreme Court law are essentially abusing children. The question is, do they know that, and are they doing it intentionally, or do they not know that? Because those are the only two choices, really. They either don't know it, which makes them incompetent, or they do know it, which makes them evil, because they're hurting children on purpose. Now, what happens in a big bureaucracy like this is people are separated from accountability. And when they've removed all the checks and balances because of blanket immunity of judges, they've removed jury trial. I have yet to be able to find out who said a jury trial goes away in family court. That's the ultimate check and balance on judges. Not that it should happen in every case, but it should be an option for people. Well, the Constitution says that you get a jury trial for anything over $20, okay? Now, inflation adjusts that to $17.76. Let's call it $1,000. Let's call it $10,000. When you go into family court, you're fighting for your children, you're fighting for all of your current assets, and up to 23 years of your future income. And yet you get a bench trial with a judge who's indoctrinated in a system and is not even following the state statutes that already require that each parent have equal rights. So Senator Cream and every divorce judge and every divorce lawyer is essentially trying to maintain a status quo because there's a couple $2 billion in revenue involved for them. So we have insiders with conflicts of interest controlling this system and preventing laws that would improve it from passing. So Senator Cream is just one of many, but we've decided to make an example of her first, and then we'll go on to the next one. She's voting against 85% of her constituents. What else, should she do? She's supposed to represent her constituents, not her own interests and not special interests. It's clear from many of the things she's done, she's representing her own interests, not those of the people of Newton, Wellesley, and Brookline that she's paid to represent.
Some will say that the Judiciary Committee is made out of all attorneys in that committee.
Yeah, I believe it's 90% attorneys, and the legislature is over 85% attorneys.
And that's clearly a conflict of interest to have so many attorneys to serve in that type of committee.
Yeah, one of the reasons this system has run off the rails so far is because so many legislators are attorneys. Now, you can make the argument that the separation of powers of the three branches of government, the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch, you're not supposed to be acting in two branches at any one time, because that creates a conflict of interest. These three branches were created by our founding forefathers as checks and balances on each other in the system. So Cynthia Cream is a member of the legislative branch as a legislator, and she's also a member of the judicial branch as an officer of the court. So that in itself is a conflict of interest. Now, lots of lawyers are doing this. Now, if she recused herself when a bill came up that affected divorce law, we wouldn't be here. That's the proper thing to do, and she has a conflict of interest that is clear because she's stopping bills that impact her other business. You just can't have people. She needs to be removed. And the fact that she says this is not a conflict of interest says one of two things. Either one, she can't understand the concept and is incompetent, or two, she's a liar. There's really no other choice there. She's trying to fog the issue, saying that, oh, I've filed other bills. Well, she files these bills that are shams. They've got two-word changes in the law. So she can say on TV, I've submitted legislation to reform this, and I believe in reform, because everyone wants reform. Everyone knows the system is broken. You talk to any divorce lawyer, they'll tell you the system is broken, yet no one does anything to fix it, because they want it to be broken, because then they get more billable hours. There isn't an industry in the world where 15 people billing $300 an hour sit around all morning waiting for one person, the judge, that's paid $75 an hour. That can't happen economically except in a monopoly and a system where there are conflicts of interest inherent in the system to maintain that economic rape of the American family or the Massachusetts family.
And we see that all the time. I mean, this program is heavily involved in court watching, and we do occasionally see family probate court judges coming in at whatever time they want. Judge Mary Manzi, for example, comes into the court at 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock, and the clients are actually paying their attorneys $200, $300. What type of changes are you calling for that you would like to see?
Well, I think what we're trying to do now is begin to set an example. We've put forth legislation, and when I say we, I use the term broadly. There's many groups and independent project groups. This is so impactful on so many people. It probably affects more than half of the people in Massachusetts at any one time. And if you include grandparents and cousins and other parts of the family that essentially are denied a member of their family because of this 90% sole custody thing that's happening, it probably affects almost everyone in the state. So I would like to see a bunch of things happen. Number one, we need the shared parenting bill passed so that by default, parents don't have to spend $78,000 to lose, which is what happens mostly in Massachusetts, in trying to get an equal position in their child's lives. We know that's best for children. It ought to be the default position, okay? That doesn't mean that it couldn't be changed in situations where that's appropriate, but all we're asking the judges to do is what they're required by law to do anyway.
Which is their job.
Write down a reason of why they would terminate or limit a parent's rights. That's called a finding of fact. And a judge has two jobs. They have to determine the facts and apply the law. Contrary to popular belief, they don't have that much discretion. Where the law is clear, there's not a lot of interpretation. They're supposed to do it. Well, the law already says parents should have equal rights. They've flogged it with these 12 or so things that they claim is the best interest of children. But statistically, we know that's overridden enormously by having equal time with both parents in their lives. There are over 200 studies that prove this. And there's not ever been a study done in the history of mankind that says sole custody is good for children. So anytime you hear someone saying the best interest of children that's in this industry, it's a lie.
Give us some example as to what the people can expect to hear in that industry, in the court systems, involving their way of saying the best interest of the children.
Well, in the statutes in Massachusetts, there are about a dozen different criteria. But we've had meetings with Paula Carey, and we've confirmed that no judge in Massachusetts has ever taken a course on what the best interest of children really is. We've offered to bring in experts from out of state that are independents and have decades of experience. We've produced videos and evidence kits to be submitted by parents that begin to force the judges to be educated on this. But they're running on tradition, and they're sexist. In fact, we're all sexist. I could bring up a lot of examples. I gave a speech in Washington recently and brought up a lot of examples because men are programmed to protect women by our DNA, and the opposite actually isn't true. Women are programmed to protect children, as we are. And so there's inherent biases in the genetics of how we're brought up, as well as the socialization of people. So it's not an easy job for a judge to be on the bench and have mathematical equality between the parties. But that is their job. They're supposed to be unbiased. And when you know that 90% generate sole custody decisions, you know something's really wrong there. I mean, I don't believe that 90% of fathers don't want to be involved in the upbringing of their children. Many of them are intimidated because of the cost of a case to give up custody or equal custody. And of course that's because they don't know it's harmful to their children. The system ought to disclose that and ought to educate about that to prevent children from being damaged. Other things we have to do, to go back to your question, we have to have more judicial accountability. I would like to see videos in all the courtrooms. It's a known fact, and we've filed complaints with the FBI that the system videotapes. It's very hard to do with videotapes. We need reform of the 209A restraining order laws, because some lawyers will tell you that 90% of those should not be granted. They're being, quote, given out like candy. I know you did a show on that, I've seen, and how that's being abused, but the restraining order is meant to be used as a defense against domestic violence. And 90% of them are actually being used as a sword instead of as a shield by people to gain favor in a divorce or to get even. And a lot of vindictive people go out and get this. I've sat in the court and I literally see, the woman will say the word fear, the judge will grant it, and she's practically laughing. As soon as she turns around, as she leaves the courtroom, she's practically laughing and smiling at what she got, because she knows she's gaming the system. Now, of course, men could abuse that too, but it's much, much less common. We've done some studies and we've figured out the statistics, and it's very difficult for a man to get a restraining order, even though, of course, a woman with a knife is just as dangerous as any man could ever be, and so the amount of damage done can be equal. So those are the first three things I'd like to see: shared parenting, more judicial accountability, and video in the courtrooms, and some feedback to eliminate judges. We're running some people on the Governor's Council now because the approval of judges for a lifetime position is basically a rubber stamp, and that's a real problem. It's almost impossible to remove a Massachusetts judge.
So if we have judges having conflict of interest, we have lawyers having conflict of interest, we understand that there is the State Ethics Commission that is required to investigate these, and there's also rules of professional misconduct for lawyers as well. Why ain't these laws being enforced?
Well, it appears to me that these organizations are essentially sham organizations. I've followed many of the judicial complaints, and they'll sit on a complaint for a year, and we know for a fact they haven't contacted any of the witnesses, and then they'll send a letter saying they haven't found any cause to move forward. So it appears to me the Judicial Conduct Commission is essentially a sham to protect the judges. The Board of Bar Overseers of the lawyers, if a lawyer is stealing money and they have a smoking gun or some publicity, they will take action. But in general, the ethics of the lawyers can be pretty low before anything happens, and it requires some publicity before they're going to do something. And so there's just too much flexibility. And again, it's the foxes watching the hen house. It's all judges and lawyers that are running the Judicial Oversight Committee. It's all judges and lawyers who are running the Board of Bar Overseers. So they let their peers, or their brothers, as they call, and sisters, as they call them in court, they're getting away with anything but murder in this system, because they're all going along to get along. There are many instances where lawyers are documented as doing, very nasty things. And the lawyers that speak out are disbarred. These boards have actually created rules that prevent the lawyers from saying anything against the judicial system. So that's a violation of First Amendment free speech rights that prevents these problems from coming to light. So once again, it's self-dealing, it's conflict of interest, it's being run by what generates the most money and by the political and legal elite that control and make these decisions. And most people are completely unaware of all these conflicts that are happening in these back rooms and creating these problems.
So we know that if judges are investigating complaints of other judges, lawyers are investigating complaints of lawyers themselves. That's clearly a conflict of interest. What would it take to reform this whole entire industry?
Well, that's a big question, and I don't think there's any one simple thing. There's no magic bullet. There's probably a dozen, various things that need to be done. I think these review boards need to have panels of common citizens on them. And people would argue they don't know enough to determine, but most of this stuff is common sense. Right. It doesn't require a lot of knowledge of the law to determine whether someone's breaking the judicial canons or the rules for lawyers or the law in itself. I mean, you just read the statute or you read the rule, and then you see what the behavior was and what the witnesses say. That's kind of a black and white comparison in most areas. Granted, sometimes there's gray area, but most of it's pretty black and white. So an independent citizens body should probably be more than 50% of any of these panels. They will set up these committees, and they'll be all lawyers. You shouldn't have any divorce lawyer able to be on a committee that determines child support. Last year they raised child support by up to 40%, when Massachusetts was already one of, some say, the highest child support in the nation already. It's just insane. Child support isn't child support. The panel refused to look at any data involving the cost of raising children. Now, who would do that? I mean, what else do you need to know that committee is essentially a sham? The lawyers want the child support to be as high as possible because that justifies the most billable hours in the fight, and it gets people back again and again and again in the system.
It's interesting you bring the child support up, and I'd like to go into a little bit more discussion. If you have extra time, we'd love to do another show with you in regards to this particular topic. But getting back to Senator Cream, in Massachusetts, the people have the right to petition their legislators to remove a bad judge in the Commonwealth. And basically the last petition was in 2002 with Judge Lopez. How come your legislators are not bringing these petitions forward? Is there a particular rule that you need to do in order to get this forward?
Well, first, the mechanism is called a bill of address, and I believe it requires a majority of the legislature to pass it. So basically, you'd probably have to have video evidence of a judge behaving badly. Of course, there's no videos in the courtroom. So there's a lot of room for interpretation. But I think the flexibility around the rules. It's like the frog in the pot. When the temperature goes up slowly over decades, the frog gets roasted, it doesn't jump out. Same thing here. Each passing year, because of greater infiltration and control by lawyers of the whole legislative process and the whole legal system, what you have is a system that people get used to and accept as standard operating procedure, even though many of the things they're doing every day are blatantly illegal. They're throwing people in jail for having a heart attack because they fall behind on their child support. They're extorting money out of friends and family illegally because you can't send someone to jail for not having the money. That's a debtor's prison, and it's been outlawed. You can send someone to jail under contempt of court if they refuse to pay a lawful child support order and they have the money. But what they're doing is they're throwing people in jail expecting that the parents and everyone else will come up with that money. That's just a legalized form of extortion. So this has become common and accepted practice because they've eliminated all the checks and balances. There's no oversight by these committees. The appeal costs $10,000. Now in business we know only 1 in 11 customers that has a problem will complain, okay? Now what do you think that complaint rate would go to if you had to pay $10,000 to complain? That's what an appeal is. You pay a lawyer $10,000 or more to do an appeal, to go through that process. It takes a year, and guess what? Even if you win, it goes back to the same judge, who's now pissed because they've got a record of having been overturned on appeal. That's a system that's totally misdesigned. It doesn't work right. You can't require people who are being abused by the system to pay the system to abuse them, to pay them more in tens of thousands of dollars. That's an inherent flaw in the design of the system.
Especially where government works for the people. And, you know, they're basically hurting the people they work for. We have another minute and a half left on the show. We're going to continue having a conversation with you, but we understand you have a website that can bring up all these issues. Can you tell us how people can reach?
When I started this, I started capturing information, and I'm up to over 1,200 pages at the website fathersunite.org, which is information for people that are trapped in the system and being abused by it. We recommend people seek direct contact with the spouse, then go to mediation, and generally we recommend they don't use lawyers at all, because lawyers are designed and trained to essentially promote conflict. They make it into a win-lose. A divorce shouldn't be a win-lose. So www.fathersunite.org, the URL divorceracket.org will also get you the same place. You can download a flyer on CREAM, and you can search that site for over 1,200 pages of information on people to help them through these divorces.
Now, your flyer has real briefly, I'll state that your flyer has a picture of a garbage can with Senator Cream's picture on it. Is that an indication that you're looking to can her in this election on the primaries?
Yeah, it's a play on the phrase to can Cream. We're looking to clean up Beacon Hill in general, and she's one of the worst examples of abuse of power and conflicts of interest in the system.
Well, I wish you luck in your effort to remove her and to hold government accountable to the people. You've been watching Behind the Scenes. I am your host, Hector Montalvo. Join us next time as we go behind the scenes to ask the tough questions, bring you their responses, and we let you decide. Thank you for watching.